What did Rayleigh really mean when he told the Straw Hats they'd have to decide for themselves what to do about the true history? And why didn't the Roger pirates tell the world what they found? What if the key to unlocking Emu's backstory is a perspective we've never considered? And what if it's Emu that's actually the ultimate victim of the One Piece true history? Today we're bringing you not just a mega theory, but our greatest video yet, packed with details that questions what we know about the ancient kingdom. We'll also be diving into side theories and giving a fresh perspective on some older scenes to point out details Oda has hidden, such as Stelly noticing Morley in the Red Line over 100 chapters prior to its reveal. My name's dendenkushi, support free content by subscribing, and feel free to listen in the background while you're gaming or whatever, we won't be offended. By analysing quotes, the reader gets a sense that Emu suffered tremendously, likely under the subjugation and experimentation of the ancient kingdom's greed for advanced technology. The mixture of nature and nurture caused Emu to make all the wrong choices, such as isolating themselves from the world government and segregating others. This mainly took place over the Void Century, resulting in the current era, whereby children suffer and dreams become nightmares. This was manifested physically in the Elbaf arc. This suffering will only stop once Emu is defeated, and Joy Boy's successor fulfills the will of D, bringing about the new era, curing the disease of the heart, but on a global scale. In contrast to Emu, we have a ton of heroes. In the story, being human is an aspect of being a hero. An example of this is Nakama, demonstrated in Luffy's fight with Lucci, when Luffy says, "It's better than doing nothing while my friends get taken away" in chapter 420. Some important characters have an equivalent to Nakama but are villains, such as the Gorosei. So what makes a hero and what makes a villain according to Eiichiro Oda, and who will be the true hero by the end of the story? By answering these questions we can deduce Joy Boy and Emu's motives, backstories, and how their journeys conclude. One Piece is a multi-dimensional story built up of many different themes and styles. The story is known for its comedy, for example, a favourite of mine being this all-time banger with Crocus. Don't or someone will die. Oh, and who would that be? Well, me. But aside from the funny stuff, One Piece has some hard-hitting deep lines, like Robin's famous "I want to live" moment. Oda unveils deep subplots, lore, and mysteries through its dialogue, whether it's super explicit like how devil fruits are made, or super subtle like shipping Frankie and Robin. Important characters such as Luffy tell the reader what it means to unravel these mysteries and become a hero. The significance of the meaning of being a hero is particularly focused on in Elbaf, as perceptions become more and more central to the arc. So, for example, did Loki kill Harold for the fruit, or didn't he? Or was there more to it? Now, since One Piece is a manga, it relies on a mixture of dialogue and images to convey the messages Oda's communicating to the reader. There's also some supplemental material like the Vivre cards and SBS installments that give us vital character information, like the fact Luffy's penis is made of rubber, Buggy's penis can detach from his body, Hody Jones has 2 penises, Jinbei has 2, and Apu has a triangle for balls. Oda also teases us with clues that are later given context, such as Vivi seeing Karasu's crows before Karasu actually reached the Reverie. By diving deeper into these clues, we can uncover all sorts, as I mentioned, from the location of Laugh-Tale to how Luffy created a fishman from a drawing. A good example of one of these quotes is when Luffy says, "If you don't take risks, you can't create the future." This echoes Shanks' bet on the future, or in other words, Luffy being the dawn of a new era. This bet is embodied by the iconic straw hat, which incidentally is circled by a red line. Whitebeard asks Shanks, "What enemy did you give your left arm to?" And Shanks replies, "This, I gave it up for a new era." Similar sentiments are shared by Roger, Joy Boy, and Pedro, among others, so we can see here that Oda is highlighting how some characters are tied to new eras. Vegapunk confirms this in his speech, saying, "The future is in your hands, and you have the power to change it. Do not falter, do not lose hope. The dawn of a new era is upon us, and you are its heralds." Sacrifices like Shanks' arm are required to progress the current era and change the world, which Vegapunk also confirms in his speech. Shanks says, "By experiencing both victory and defeat, running away and shedding tears, a man will become a man. It's okay to cry, but you have to move on." Although Shanks only lost a limb, Roger sacrificed his life to ignite a great search for the One Piece treasure, alongside many other characters in the story that have given their lives for the cause. Interestingly, Doflamingo said the weak don't get to choose how they die, so perhaps being able to choose how you die means you're powerful enough to change the era in the One Piece world. Smoker tells us in 483, a man's worth isn't determined by how he lives, but rather how he dies, which adds to this idea. During Wano, Kaido says death completes a man. Now Joy Boy died, but Emu didn't, so does this mean that Joy Boy is complete, and Emu isn't complete? However, Brook says, what kind of fool plans to die, telling us that there's more to sacrifice than simply dying. Giola reinforces this, saying life is the most beautiful art, so being alive is important. Oda shows there are smaller, albeit abstract, sacrifices as well, which gives us a broader idea of what's considered true heroic strength. When Usopp says, there comes a time when a man must stand and fight, the time is when his friends, dreams, and honor are all laughed at. In chapter 331, it demonstrates how being determined sometimes means being laughed at or ridiculed, mirrored in his counterpart 400 years ago, Noland, who held the conviction that the Golden City was real, even when it resulted in his death. Noland's name went down in infamy as a liar, so the sacrifice in this case was Noland's reputation, matching Usopp's quote. We see this embodied by Katakuri too, who is usually too shy to show his face, yet says, if you want to laugh at that fool, then laugh at me too, prioritizing his values over ridicule. The conviction to laugh in the face of death may turn out to play a role in Nika's infamous laughing nature. Anywho, the pattern of sacrifice and change has been through at least 3 cycles or eras in the One Piece world, foreshadowed by Robin's quote in chapter 395, history is like an endless waltz, the 3 beasts of war, peace and revolution continue on forever, and later confirmed through the Elbathian Haley myth, a historical text made up of 3 eras. In One Piece, the ability to make sacrifices that change the era comes from having a strong will, specifically aspects of will such as ambition and conviction. As long as I'm alive, anything is possible, is a One Piece quote that underscores Joy Boy's message to the future, as well as Oda's message to the reader. This message is that with enough will, anyone can achieve their dream. Roger says, bear conviction under your flag, highlighting the fierce resolve that got him to Laugh Tale. Luffy is the epitome of conviction, such as when he says, if I die fighting for it, that's fine, I will fight. This demonstrates the ambition of the Monkey Clan and their relentless pursuit for freedom, hinted at when Sengoku tells Garp, Garp, it's your damn family again. This tells us that conviction is not a choice for Monkey D. Luffy, but his family's nature and his spirit. Whitebeard reiterated this when he said, you're nothing but a mass of spirit, you can't help but talk big. Luffy's counterpart Blackbeard conveys the same, saying, let the heavens deal with life and death, even the most fearful lose to that. Let's live for another moment, mirroring this devil-may-care attitude and strong will. The line, I prefer death over defeat, shows the extent of this type of conviction in One Piece, which sometimes borders on supernatural, best conveyed by Zoro, who says, it takes a real man to die and then come back from the dead without dying, which considering his nothing happened moment and the whole Grim Reaper scene, it seems like this could actually be possible. Zoro's mentor and idol is Mihawk, and Mihawk has the line, what do you know about death? Have you ever died? Again suggesting some supernatural life after death. Conviction and ambition are not just aspects of humanity, but also freedom through making your own choices. In chapter 744, Sabo says it's not some kind of fate that decides our lives, it's us, explicitly stating that people can change the course of destiny, ergo free will. The heroes with a super strong will in the story are contrasted by villains, such as Crocodile, who says, what good are your happy ideals if you can't do anything to make them a reality? This quote hints that limiting your dreams limits your own potential, or in other words, without a big dream, you cannot change the era. Luffy doesn't care about fate either, and instead expresses his freedom, such as through his promises to help Nakama, an aspect that is super important to every single Straw Hat, which is actually a big reason why each Straw Hat joins the crew in the first place. Frankie confirms this in his post-Enies Lobby speech, for example, when he says during 423, not one of them hesitates to take on the world for the sake of their comrades. Pretty much the whole arc was dedicated to the theme of Nakama, by Robin in particular. Robin in the same chapter says, I have nothing to be afraid of now because I'm not alone. As we all know, the whole Enies Lobby situation ended with a Buster Call as well. Now, when Luffy commits to liberating Wano, irrelevant of the global repercussions, he says, I'm from overseas. What's wrong with that? A stranger's not allowed to save this country? I made a promise to my friend Tama, who gave me food, that I'll make this country a place where she can eat as much as she wants. If I can't fulfill that promise, this country will be an eternal hell, illustrating how Luffy has pretty much zero care or respect for any form of politics and instead acts under his own conviction, his own freedom. This massively undermines the world government's control. Other Joy Boy figures show the same conviction and disregard for social norms, such as Fisher Tiger, who scaled the Red Line and released the slaves in Marijua. In episode 1026, Odin said, "When you're trying to protect something, it takes a lot of determination to live without compromising your belief. No matter how much time goes by, stick to what you believe in and don't let it go." The revolutionary dragon himself says it's important to live without regrets, echoed by Ace in the quote, "Live life without regrets." Zeph says, even if armed with hundreds of weapons, there are times where you just can't beat a man with the spear of conviction in his gut. There's similar statements in Skypiea. For example, "Let me tell you one thing I am certain of. No one has ever proved that El Dorado or Skypiea doesn't exist. People may laugh and say they're silly legends. Well, let them laugh. That's what makes it a great adventure." So that's Oda showing how some characters are indifferent to people's doubts and instead just carry on seeking the truth. The motivations behind such conviction also come from other human aspects, such as emotion. We see this conveyed with love, for example. Boa is repeatedly associated with hearts, her devil fruits design, her chapter 798 cover appearance, and her ability to petrify victims through love. Gloriosa noted, in the East they say love is like a hurricane, a phrase first used by Sanji in the East Blue. Boa's main theme song is Hurricane My Love. It could even be that love is the key to one of the deepest aspects of the true history. What I mean by this is Emu, Joy Boy and Lily were likely in a love triangle. As with Loki and Lola, it's possible Emu loved Lily romantically. Additionally, they were perhaps arranged to marry, indicated by the relentless depiction of wedding cakes, such as in the chapter 420 cover, where Sanji makes a wedding cake while a baboon is caged up watching on, but the cake has been infiltrated by some mice. So this likely depicts Joy Boy as a captive while Emu was marrying Lily, and there was something within the cake, suggesting there's like some nefarious plan going on behind the scenes. We saw the idea of wives at Marijua in the Egghead arc via Ginny. Through Joy Boy's influence, Lily likely found the courage to not marry Emu, but instead marry someone for love, again foreshadowed by Lola, who after several proposals eventually marries Gotti. However, there seems to have been some severe consequences through lovesickness, which I covered in an older video. In the video I talk about Green Bull's tattoo and Luffy's mum as well, so check that out for more. Frankie tells us in chapter 437 directly that love is important to power in the quote, "Your punches are missing something important. Love." And of course we've seen the whole love punch and love kick thing, which were also particularly powerful. That said, one of the more mysterious elements of humanity and freedom in the story is imagination, particularly since 1044, where Luffy was revealed to have the sun god Nika fruit, rooted in imagination. Usopp uses his imagination to lie when he's scared. It comes true, and then people call him a god. Buggy uses his imagination when he's scared by bluffing, highlighted by his island being called Empty Bluffs Island. However, these bluffs always come true, and he's also called a god. Bonnie believed in Sun God Nika, and she can seemingly use her imagination to distort her physique, with Luffy encouraging her to keep doing it. Every one of these aspects is a way in which Oda conveys what he believes it truly means to be human. A king is not the one who's the strongest, it's the one who can carry on the will of others, is a quote in chapter 970 by Odin, which tells us that what's inside is what's important. The same sense of conviction, imagination, and general humanity is in every human in the One Piece world, confirmed by Bonclay stating, "One may stray from the path of a man, one may stray from the path of a woman, but there is no straying from the path of a human." Beige adds to the idea that anyone can have the conviction to change the world when he says to Katakuri, "Everyone has an equal right to change the future." The mysterious quote by Willie Gallen that says, "Anything that humans can imagine is a possibility in reality," also adds to this, particularly alongside the SBS entry where Oda said people could once fly until people stopped believing. There are other more abstract aspects to humanity that Oda touches on also, such as with devil fruits. Vegapunk theorized that devil fruits are born from the desires of humans. So, in other words, if a person is in great distress, they wish for a savior, then a devil fruit grows with the power of the savior. I covered in my last video how there's ties between, for example, the Hito Nomis, which seem particularly important, but they have the name Hito in, so which is human, and then they're devil fruits, which is devil, of course. So it's like a contrast between man and devil, or man and god. York was the greed aspect of Vegapunk, and she aligned herself with the world government. So alongside other examples, such as Kid in chapter 594, when he says, "Compared to the righteous greed of the rulers, the criminals of the world seem much more honorable." Greed comes from desire, and so is a negative aspect of humanity, leading to serious problems like the strike on the Leisure Kingdom. From this, we can speculate that the ancient kingdom may have desired devil fruits to improve their quality of life, only for them to become greedy and desire unnecessary powers, hinted at by the jacket fruit. So in other words, if you grow up in a society that's really, really poor and has no heat, then you might wish for fire, but if you are a child that grows up in a really lavish environment, you might be wasteful with your wishes. For example, wishing for a jacket or some piece of clothing. Another aspect tied closely to devil fruits is fear, as it seems to interrupt some devil fruit abilities. A decent example is Big Mum's soul fruit abilities. They only work on people that fear her. We see a twist on this with Sugar's devil fruit, which turns off when she's scared. Anel confirms the power of emotion through fear when he says, "It is not death that causes people to fear God. Fear is God." Fear of death is worse than death itself is a quote from Luffy that also highlights this in chapter 100. So again, Oda demonstrates that there are negative aspects to humanity too. Finally, death plays an integral role in the aspect of the story, confirmed when we learn that devil fruits reincarnate after someone's death. Luffy has the ability to bring out aspects of other people's humanity, such as Robin when she shouts, "I want to live," and more directly in Egghead, where, as I mentioned, Luffy encouraged Bonnie to go into Nika form. This shows that not only does Luffy have the power of strong conviction, but also the power to give others strong conviction. Such conviction is demonstrated by Frankie in the quote from chapter 425, which says, "You can kill them, but they won't die," referring to his Galila Nakama. This trait reaches as far as to sway the Straw Hat's enemies, such as Katakuri, and in some cases even convert them, which Oda culminates with the Grand Fleet. Or in the most prominent example would be Robin, right, joining the actual crew. So in summary, Oda places a huge focus on humanity and how it makes people powerful, and sometimes weak, meaning that being human is an important message and plays a role in the lore. From this we can deduce that Joy Boy and Emu were both human, with human motivations for their plans and actions. This is despite Emu's supposed divine status and other mentions of gods in One Piece. Now, just because Sabo has this quote about fate and Luffy sort of doesn't care about fate at all, fate certainly does play an important role, stated explicitly by Rayleigh when he said, "Maybe nothing in this world happens by accident. As everything happens for a reason, our destiny slowly takes form." Luffy accidentally ate his devil fruit. Boa and her sisters were forced to eat devil fruits. Buggy accidentally ate his devil fruit. Momo ate a devil fruit because he was hungry. In fact, almost all devil fruit users accidentally eat their fruit, or at least ate one not by their own choice. So here we see how Oda uses fate to interact with characters' destinies. We can also be sure that fate is important because events that serendipitously repeat themselves, such as the God Valley incident, happens again with the Egghead Island incident. Because these events repeat themselves, we can uncover clues, such as the fact Zebek was likely Garp's mentor, and sacrificed himself for Garp, reflected in the present day by the Rocky Port incident where Garp does the same for Kobe. Side note, I've literally just read 1145, and in that Zebek calls Loki a brat, which is evidence we've been using for a long time, which is a word distinctly used by Garp. In One Piece, this is best embodied by the concept of inherited will, a force that seemingly binds Joy Boy's successors to his destiny in some way or another. However, Oda explains that fate can play an important role in helping the heroes of the One Piece world. For example, the Straw Hats discover the real golden city of Shandora, despite it being thought to be a mythical city, demonstrating how their determination has made the impossible become possible. Ivankov called these effects miracles, saying miracles can only descend upon those with the will to carry on. So here we see Luffy and his Nakama are helped by miracles because of their ambitious nature. This is embodied completely by a quote from Iceberg in chapter 430, which states, "Right now I'm looking at a miracle. The miracle of a ship that has gone far beyond its limits, right before the merry burns." We saw something similar when young Kuma gets hit with the beam of light in the church, suggesting his unwavering faith has been gifted with a miracle after a horrific ordeal at the God Valley hunting games. Earlier I mentioned Luffy fighting Lucci, during which Oda touches on the same motif through Luffy, who says, "What do you know about impossible?" Additionally, I mentioned Frankie's post-Enies lobby speech, whereby he also said it can only be called a miracle after the Straw Hats are saved by drowning from the Jugon. Perhaps this particular miracle could foreshadow that Joy Boy met Poseidon from nearly drowning. After all, Luffy can't swim, so it's a fitting connection. In contrast to this, we see the world government fake a holy beam of light with Sister Carmel when she gives her speech in order to infiltrate Elbath. So Oda is showing here how heroes are gifted by fate through a beam of light in Kuma's case, and the villains are manipulating people using a beam of light in Carmel's case. So you have true fate versus fake fate, you could say. Additionally, one aspect of fate in One Piece is that the Straw Hats all seem to be mysteriously bound by ancient wills. As the story continues, we're probably going to get more direct parallels, for example, between Zoro and Ryuma, potentially even Zoro and Najiro as the reverse. And I do have a video coming out about each of the Straw Hats and the ancient will that they tied to. Okay, so despite Luffy's strong sense of independence, he still requires others, highlighted when Luffy says, being alone is more painful than getting hurt. Luffy's treasure is his Straw Hat. Luffy puts Nami in his straw hat by putting it on her head, telling the reader although they're not blood related, Luffy considers his nakama as important to him as his treasure. Luffy also says, I know that I need every member of my crew. I can't use swords or navigate the seas or cook or lie. I need them all, confirming this. Robin adds, no matter how much you want to do things alone, no one can accomplish anything by themselves, which could potentially also highlight Imu's vulnerability as an isolated monarch. Luffy's relationship with other characters is central to his sense of freedom, as well as his development as a character, and he relies on them saying, without you, I cannot become the Pirate King. This aligns with what we're told about bonds between nakama being a powerful force. Dofi highlights the importance of nakama in 767 when he says, in this world, there are countless things you can't possibly do alone, adding to the point. Usopp says in chapter 322, the things you can't do alone, call for your friends to help. And Zoro adds to this in 485 saying, I refuse to let my comrades die, even if it means sacrificing my own life. We get the same sentiment shared by Frankie in 423 saying, I died once, I don't mind throwing my life away again so the Straw Hats can leave here alive. On the other hand, however, Luffy is also needed by his nakama, illustrated by Chopper, who says, I realized that back then the reason I wanted to become a human was that I really just wanted to have friends. Now I just want to be a monster that can help Luffy. Here Oda tells us the bonds between friendship are what's important, and not the self. Something Oda reiterates in the Binks Sake line, doesn't matter who you are, someday you will be bones. Luffy is the linchpin of the Straw Hat crew, told to us in Zoro's quote, if you waver, who can we have faith in? Zoro also explains the mechanics of the nakama theme in a monologue, stating, what is teamwork really when you get right down to it? It's just about protecting each other and helping each other out. I guess most people would say so, but they're just fooling themselves. I think teamwork is more than that in the end. It's about individuals taking individual risks, if you ask me. We work together by working separately. You stand up to risk your own life. You do what you can, the best you can. Then you turn to others and expect the same from them. Bonds between nakama are repeatedly mentioned as sources of power and conviction. Idaho even says, it's required for victory. In the quote, we're doing this together because victory doesn't come to one person alone. This is contrasted by the world government's way of doing things, which involves isolation and attempts at empowering humans unnaturally, only to be disposed of if they fail. Luffy showed this in Water 7, saying to Nero, everything about you is a work in progress. Cypherpol 9 doesn't need you. You are only superhuman if you possess the 6 powers, right before disposing of. Oda tells us bonds between nakama are strengthened through emotions. The nakama theme in One Piece is often embodied by the sake cup ritual. Roger had sake brothers and he was like Joy Boy. Odin drank sake with them too, and he's a parallel of Joy Boy. Luffy and Ace and Sabo also drank sake, so it's pretty much guaranteed that Joy Boy also had sake brothers. So from this we can infer that Joy Boy and Emu had nakama, such as Emeth, and potentially even were each other's nakama at one point. Once we introduce the connections both have to Lily Nefertari, it becomes apparent that with the addition of Lily they were a close trio, and we see this all the time in One Piece. For example, we have the Monster Trio, Roger Garp and Zebek Trio, a captain and his 2 wings make a trio, and the whole astrological concept of a grand trine, which is an alignment of 3 planets that Oda's referenced before. Notably, the Sake Cup ritual is called Sakazuki, sharing the same name with Akainu, hinting that Akainu's inevitable tragic backstory will involve the death of a close nakama. Emu and Joy Boy's perspective on nakama is conveyed through the current era featured in the story, such as when King boasts to Zoro about superior genetics, to which Zoro replies, I hate those kind of excuses. Oda highlights the dichotomy of the 2 different perspectives here, which is that the world government's approach is that allies are disposable resources, valued according to their nature, such as lineage. The other is Luffy's approach, which is to cherish and nurture and support his nakama merely because he wants to. Luffy doesn't actually care about his nature, he doesn't care about his parents are, etc, etc. Both of these approaches reflect Emu and Joy Boy's personal backstories and defines their perspective of the world. Oda chooses justice in the story to highlight the difference in these perspectives. Spandam is a great example of justice in One Piece, embodied in the quote in chapter 423 saying, "This is the power of the Buster Call. This is justice, Cutty Flam. Now hand over Nico Robin, and I'll overlook your crimes." The quote shows how the world government use the law to persecute, but ignore it or bend it when it's convenient to them, so their morals are corruptible, basically. Often in stories, the protagonist follows the light path, and the antagonist follows the dark path, but we are often reminded in One Piece that the lines here are blurred. Dofi gives us the best definition of true justice in the series, with his absolute fan-favourite speech, featuring the quote, "Whoever wins the war becomes justice." Saul in Robin's flashback says, "There are as many rights and wrongs in this world as there are viewpoints." Kuzan repeats this notion when he says, "Justice changes its shape depending on where you stand." So interestingly, all three of these characters are closely tied to the world government, yet have their own opinion of justice. This is echoed by Sword, which is epitomized by Luffy's grandfather, Garp. From this, we can see that despite Emu's totalitarian rule, different perspectives are inevitable and will lead to the clash of ideals. At one point, Smoker says, "You've got some weird illusions about the Marines. As long as man joins together to conspire against man, there is no such thing as a perfect, untainted organization. Assumptions will let the enemies walk free. Don't be deceived by their appearances." What Smoker means when he says "don't be deceived" is elaborated on when Law says, "There are things you can't see unless you change your perspective." In other words, Joy Boy likely gained a grander perspective as someone who travelled the world, whereas Emu's perspective on justice is sheltered and limited to what Emu has experienced. This also is soft confirmation that Emu cannot leave Marijois, which is how Oda physically manifests Emu's isolated point of view. Oda hints at the nature of the perspective when Neptune, the only character named after a planet that isn't a Gorosei member, tells us outdated laws are just curses. This means the law of the world government no longer serves the people, has become outdated, and now acts as a hindrance to people's way of life, which we see through holy tributes, etc. But how is it people get these different perspectives and ideas of justice in the One Piece world? More specifically, why is it that Joy Boy and Emu have different definitions of justice? Paying close attention to the story tells us the difference in their takes on justice is because of their childhoods and the effects of isolation. This is reflected in the same Dofi speech from earlier in the line, "Kids who have never seen peace and kids who have never seen war have different values." The most prominent example of this is Kuma's character, later succeeded by Bonnie. Bartholomew Kuma's backstory in One Piece is a tragic yet powerful example of how childhood experiences shape ideals and perspective, reinforcing a recurring theme in the series, the way upbringing and early suffering mold a person's worldview. As a child, he was enslaved by the Celestial Dragons, an experience that deeply affected him both physically and mentally. Kuma's flashback featured the hunting games of the God Valley incident. After eating the pawpaw fruit, Kuma and Nakama settled in the Sorbet Kingdom. Again, his experience was marked by suffering under the rule of the oppressive King Bakuri and the influence of the world government. Despite this, Kuma was naturally kind-hearted, and he maintained a faith in the value of protecting others, an ideal that would later define his entire life. His suffering as a child instilled in him a hatred for oppression, as he experienced firsthand the cruelty of the Celestial Dragons and sought to resist them. It also solidified his belief in self-sacrifice, as he consistently placed others before himself, from enduring pain to protect other people, and later becoming a Pacifista Project test subject to ensure Bonnie's safety. Kuma's backstory reflects a larger trend in One Piece, where characters' childhood experiences forge their moral compasses and long-term ambitions. Luffy and Sabo, for instance, were raised under different conditions, Luffy by a loving grandfather and Dadan, Sabo by abusive nobles, leading them both to develop different takes on freedom, which might even play into the Sabo quote I said earlier, where Sabo believes that humans preside over fate, which is a very Celestial Dragon kind of vibe. Doflamingo, having witnessed the downfall of his once powerful family, became ruthless and power-hungry. Nico Robin, persecuted by the world government as a child, developed a deep distrust of authority, but also a thirst for uncovering the truth. Kuma's case fits into this pattern, but in contrast to many others, His childhood suffering did not make him cruel or vengeful. Instead, it cemented his selfless ideals. This contrast between pain and kindness reinforces Oda's message. People may react differently to suffering, but the most admirable characters in One Piece endure the past. This contrast between pain and kindness reinforces Oda's message. People may react differently to suffering, but the most admirable characters in One Piece endure their past without losing their humanity. Kuma's decision to become a cyborg and work with the Revolutionary Army while still agreeing to serve the world government stems from his understanding that true freedom often comes with personal sacrifice. His willingness to endure suffering for the sake of others mirrors his past experiences, showing how childhood not only shapes ideals but also determines the way one chooses to act on them. This makes Kuma one of the most tragic yet noble figures in the entire story. Someone whose entire life has been dictated by an unshakable belief in protecting others, even if it means erasing himself in the process. Vegapunk underscores this all when he says to Bonnie, "It doesn't matter if the entire planet is against you, Kuma will always be on your side." The last aspects of Kuma that makes childhood such an integral part of his character is his young daughter, who has the ability to turn people into children. As a child, she has become a notorious pirate, initially motivated by the shitty part of the world that Emu inspired, only later to reignite her motivation through the Joy Boy figure Luffy and become an agent against the world government. So through Kuma's sacrifices, his daughter has become a hero of the One Piece world. Also through children, Oda demonstrates how perspectives are shaped in One Piece. This can include their upbringings, origins, and lineage, such as the purge for Roger's son, which delayed Ace's birth and ultimately caused his mother's death. Ace grew up to sacrifice his life to save Luffy, perpetuating Joy Boy's will like his father. Alternatively, according to Kid, when scum rule the world, more scum is born, suggesting Emu perpetuates her own trauma through those born in the modern era under her reign. Shame on all of you, your fear of the alien exposes your own ignorance. It is absolutely pathetic for you to torment little children, is said by Odin in chapter 963, reinforcing this. It's hinted at that particular world government institutions may play a deeper role in manipulating children, such as Cypherpol, who not only recruit children, but seem to be recruited themselves within the family, as demonstrated by characters such as Kumadori's mum being a Cypherpol assassin, as well as Who's Who, Spandam, and others having their relatives appear within the subdivision at the Ohara incident. Big Mum is another example of Oda making a point about children, with her main parental figure known as Mother Carmel, a despicable woman known for selling children to the world government. We see ties to Carmel in Big Mum's name, with Mum referencing the mother in Mother Carmel, symbolic of the influence Carmel still has over Linlin. Carmel's lasting influence gets deeper when we note some of Big Mum's memories are in fact Carmel's, something that I touched on in a recent video and could foreshadow the fact that Zebek's memories affect Blackbeard. We also see Big Mum has over 100 children, unlike Carmel, who adopted loads of orphans. This reflects Mother Carmel as a parallel to the world government, highlighted by the fact it's Cypherpol that Carmel sells her orphans to. The children at Lamb's house can each be linked to characters inside the world government throughout the story, which for the sake of brevity I'll just show on the screen. So we can see that Oda is portraying how the world government perceives and subsequently treats children. He's telling us a child's upbringing in the One Piece world defines their dreams, such as Blackbeard's dream of destruction. In chapter 603, Rayleigh tells us that a child is someone who can't make choices for themselves. In the quote, "A person grows up when he has to, when he ceases to whine and starts doing things on his own." This is another way of saying vulnerable, depicted in Elbaf, for example, by the children sleepwalking and that they need to be saved by their teachers, etc, etc. Earlier we spoke about free will. Here the idea is best illustrated by Nico Robin. Robin's defined by tragedy. Her people and home were wiped out, and now she wishes to continue the will of Ohara and its history of discovering and recording knowledge. Robin's peaceful life was shattered when the world government deemed the research on Ohara a threat, fearing it could uncover secrets they wished remained hidden, in what became known as the Ohara incident. Robin witnessed the island's destruction at only 8 years old, losing her mother and everything she loved. Now branded a fugitive and one of the last survivors of Ohara, her journey became a solitary and dangerous one, marked by constant evasion and survival. To make matters even more tragic, her skills as an archaeologist made Robin an invaluable asset to powerful individuals who sought to read the poneglyph. This is an intense amount of trauma for one person to take, and inevitably leads to a transformation. Whether this transformation is into a hero or villain is down to the person. For example, it's possible that this trauma resulted in Robin's transformation during her fight with Black Maria, where she turned into an actual demon. No explanation was given, but she grew horns, wings, and lots of spider-like arms, and then proceeded to break Maria in two. As a quick aside, I've got a previous video where I discussed the fact that Black Maria was half Ushi Oni and has loads of ties to Saturn, who wasn't Ushi Oni, so there might be a deeper connection between the three of them. The wild and destructive emotional change contrasts Robin's usually stoic demeanor, suggesting Robin was reflecting the Gorosei's yokai transformations and unleashed a deeper power. This transformation resembles Robin used this ability to free her friend, which is in contrast to the Gorosei, who instead use their yokai forms to suppress freedom and truth. On a symbolic level, we often see references to sheep or lambs, which are metaphors for innocence and youth. In the cover page of 742, Robin reads a book called Stray Sheep to alpacas, leading them to fall asleep and dream bubbles that float up. We see something similar in a cover page with Luffy dreaming and counting sheep. The stories of Stray Sheep are the stories of the big players in the world, such as Roger, Nolan, and Louis Arnault. And these characters usually start off with quite a turbulent childhood. Their stories inspire the dreams of those paying attention, which in turn rise up to become the status quo and modern era. Odin says, "They can forget me for all I care. My soul will live on. Build your strength while you can, for I am a story to accompany your drinks," in chapter 972, pretty much confirming that. "An island from a dream within a dream, you can't get there unless you dream," is a quote from Rayleigh in chapter 507 that shows how dreams create the reality people live in. A solid example would be Roger inspiring the hunt for the One Piece with his own last words. Additionally, the oldest reference in the story we have to something like this in the Alabaster Crypts with the hero of Mamudine, who lived during the Age of Heavens, suggesting there was a change of era at that time, matching what we know about the One Piece calendar. But moving on, it's likely Emu and Joy Boy had different upbringing. For example, traumatic experiments sponsored by the world government feature throughout the story, from which we can speculate that Emu was experimented on in some traumatic way. A lesson learned with blood is never forgotten, is said by Dragon in chapter 1000, strengthens the idea Emu's upbringing was traumatic. This takes us back to the Lucci quote I mentioned earlier, where he says, "You can't be superhuman without the 6 powers." To Nero, a reference to Nerona. You can go deeper here and line that up with the fact that Big Mom lasted 6 days of her fast before freaking out, and Kaido made 6 transformations of the Buddha, with the 7th being thwarted by Luffy. We can see in One Piece themes repeat themselves. This tells us the theme is central to the story, which means it likely reflects elements of the Void Century, such as Joy Boy and Emu's conflict of ideals. By observing these recurring themes, we can piece together what happened to the Ancient Kingdom specifically. For example, in most arcs we see a battle for power and control of whatever island features in the arc. Alabaster had a civil conflict, Drum Island had a civil conflict, Sorbet Kingdom had a civil conflict, and in Elbath, yet again we see another civil conflict, this time between father and son in the form of Loki and Harold. From this we can infer that Joy Boy and Emu were involved in a civil conflict. This suggests Joy Boy and Emu were from the same kingdom, because that's how civil conflicts work. Seeing as we know Joy Boy's from the Ancient Kingdom, this tells us Emu is too. This would mean that Emu had access or knowledge of advanced technology, fitting elements we see throughout the story in traumatic experiments that seem to be an attempt at recreating aspects of a bygone era, such as giants and devil fruits. The current era mirrors how Emu was brought up and the consequence of that rivalry and upbringing. Emu now perpetuates this system, and as the ruler of the world, this means children currently suffer in the same way, foreshadowed by Kid at the auction house in Sabaody, saying, "What a facade, it's just a smaller version of the world." Joy Boy's legacy can also be seen, however, less commonly, considering his legacy was purged. A subtle nod to this is the smile of the children in Ohara, which matches Luffy's. Oda told us in supplemental material the village these children come from and Luffy's village, Fuchsia, are the only 2 in the story based off these specific English villages, suggesting a deeper thematic connection between the two. Joy Boy was born in the Ancient Kingdom 900 years ago and lived until around the end of the Void Century. Vegapunk confirmed this in his speech when he said, "The main character of the story was born into a kingdom with an impossibly advanced civilization 900 years ago. This means the birthright in question would be to the throne of the Ancient Kingdom." Since Joy Boy's era, the Ancient Kingdom fractured and spread across the globe, with its remnants falling under the rule of the world government. These remnants make up the islands we see in the story, confirmed by Vegapunk, who stated, "We are currently living on the pieces of a continent that existed long ago." This likely reflects a division not only in the physical kingdom, but a divide in the political kingdom, evoking what we saw with the Sorbet kingdom under King Bakori. Now, considering the D-clan is comprised of people from all different lands, it could be that they're the descendants of the Ancient Kingdom, and a product of this divide. A division in culture plays a key part in One Piece, hinted at when Sanji says, "Think of what can live together. It's as simple as that," after Luffy catches a shark which eats the rest of the fish in his tank. This makes sense, as no celestial dragons are members of the D-clan, and are instead likely descendants of those who overthrew the D-clan and the Ancient Kingdom. Oda foreshadows this through the three Saki brothers, two of which are D members, and Sabo being the only one related to celestial families not having the initial. This is also manifested in the modern narrative, with members of the D-clan often resisting or struggling with authority, such as Saul saving the books of Ohara despite being a Marine. Evidence that the D-clan and Ancient Kingdom are tied can be seen the only two members of the D-clan that died without smiling. Clover was killed for saying the name of the Ancient Kingdom, and Cobra was killed for saying the D initial, suggesting these two things could potentially share the same name. Clover says, "How can someone die for just having the wrong name?" which fits in nicely here. This starts to add up when you realise the only part of Vegapunk's speech was when he was naming the clan and talking about who they were. That was conveniently interrupted, so the reader doesn't know what was said when Vegapunk spoke about the D-clan. So Imu's actions likely divided the Ancient Kingdom into two, causing it to become vulnerable to defeat. But how could Imu's followers ever be able to finally overthrow the Ancient Kingdom when the 20 kingdoms under Imu don't have the superior technology? We know this because some of the kingdoms that still participate in the reverie don't even have electricity. In chapter 142, we see Cobra's flashback of an old reverie and still basic technology, so nothing's changed. Additionally, we know that the people that do have the skills or knowledge to advance civilization and technology are usually pursued by the world government. For example, Clover, Tom, Vegapunk, all of whom are currently dead. So how did Imu overwhelm such an advanced civilization? During Marineford, Doflamingo says, "Pirates evil, Marines are righteous. These terms have always changed throughout the course of history." Oda is showing us that the faction in power has switched places many times throughout history, and that the people who are at the top are the ones who decide what the definition of justice is. This implies that during the Void Century, the definition of justice was shifted by Imu against the Ancient Kingdom. In the Dressrosa arc, Oda gives us an important parallel. The Don Quixote family tricked the population of Dressrosa to think that they were the heroes and the Riku family were the villains, despite it in fact being the other way around. The Riku family had been framed for a massacre actually committed by the Don Quixote family. The Don Quixote family pretended to be the saviors when they are in truth the oppressors of Dressrosa, which is the same story that is being told to us regarding the Ancient Kingdom. In other words, during the Void Century, Imu and her followers manipulated the truth which brought down the Ancient Kingdom. So, how did Imu twist the status quo against the Ancient Kingdom? Well, Oda already showed us with Lalesia. Imu was revealed to have a powerful and destructive weapon, which Vegapunk confirmed to be Uranus. So it appears that 800 years ago, Imu used the same weapon on Enies Lobby, powered by an ancient fuel mirroring the Mother Flame. By doing this, Imu frames the Ancient Kingdom, their ancient weapons, and the energy source that powers them. So, if Imu did blast Enies Lobby, unaliving thousands while framing the Ancient Kingdom, then even if the Ancient Kingdom attacked the world government, it would only solidify the hate against the Ancient Kingdom further, leading to a greater war. Furthermore, this would make a powerful guise for the 20 kingdoms that still meet up at the Reverie to this day to demonize the Ancient Kingdom, giving them justification to cut them out of history. Imu didn't do this alone though, but instead had help from the other 20 kingdoms, as I mentioned. The Gorosei could be members of the 20 kingdoms, and Oda gives subtle clues to each of their motivations, which fits with the idea of a conflict of ideals. As in the case in most arcs in One Piece, the Gorosei likely were involved in political conflicts, echoes of which we can see in the current timeline. It's looking like it was one member from each region of the world, with the only exception being Fishman Island, which instead has Neptune, who is also named after a planet. Using Ethan Baron Nuzdro as a case study, I'll briefly summarise the other Gorosei members a little more compressed, so that we're not here forever. Nuzdro is heavily tied to Wano. Wano was once called the Country of Gold, linking Nuzdro as head of finance. His name contains V, referencing Venus, a symbol of gold, luxury and wealth. Orochi's financial dealings mirror Nuzdro's themes, and Orochi's fiery death parallels Nuzdro's yokai form, the Bakatsu, a burning horse. Nuzdro wears a kimono instead of a suit like the other Gorosei, further tying him to Wano. His white kimono evokes Wado Ichimonji, a Wano-made sword. As the only swordsman of the Gorosei, he recognized Zoro's Sandai Katetsu instantly. Zoro adopting Juro in Wano connects to Nuzdro's name, as does Kanjuro's name with the suffix Juro. Denjiro's transformation into Kiyoshiro mirrors Nuzdro's possible past identity. Kiyoshiro led a Yakuza, not a blood family, hinting at Nuzdro's formation of the Korozumi clan. Denjiro's eyes change dramatically, similar to what we see in Imu. The name similarities continue. Denjiro's suffix Jiro means second son, while Nuzdro's Juro means 10th son. Kyushiro, a Wano native and descendant of Ryuma and Kozaburo, shares a visual resemblance to Nuzdro. Kozaburo forged Wado Ichimonji and gave law on cursed blades, possibly connecting Nuzdro to the creation and cursing of black blades. Kyushiro's daughter, Kuina, mysteriously died, and Nuzdro uses a one-sword style just like her. Ryuma's name contains Uma, horse, paralleling Nuzdro's horse yokai form. Could Nuzdro and Ryuma have had a mentor and student relationship like Kyushiro and Zoro? Nuzdro's ice attacks in Egghead linked to the Shimatsuki, whose name means frost moon. Ringo, the likely Shimatsuki homeland, hosts the Eternal Grave, where bodies don't decay normally, reflecting themes of death and unnatural preservation that we see in Nuzdro. Ryuma's well-preserved corpse supports this. The Gorosei's apparent immortality contrasts Oda's stated human lifespan limit of 140 years, which was confirmed with a flashback of Saturn, so this shows it's unnatural. Ringo's bridge over a river symbolises the river Styx, the bridge between life and death, tying to Brook the ferryman, who Oda said would also be a horse. Ringo might be a play on Limbo, reinforcing and kind of playing with these themes of unnatural preservation and immortality. The Amatsuki clan also lacks a confirmed homeland, but has deep ties to the Shimatsuki and Kurozumi. Amatsuki Toki from 800 years ago was displaced and sought to return to Wano, hinting at a past event involving Joy Boy, the Shimatsuki, the Amatsuki, and the Kurozumi. Joy Boy likely reclaimed Wano for its rightful rulers, probably off of Nuzdro. I believe civil strife plagued Wano back then, and we see it again with Orochi's grandfather poisoning rival daimyos, including the Amatsuki. The Kurozumi's treachery seen in Kanjuro and Higurashi led to Wano's decline. These patterns echo an ancient struggle that may reveal Nuzdro's true role in Wano's history. Okay, so now with that deep dive covered, let me just summarize what was going on there. You can see more details in the full 40-50 minute video or whatever it is about Nuzdro, but the idea is pretty simple. We're given throughout the story these clues through other characters, storylines and parallels that give a bit of context to the individual Gorosei members. And so it's likely that these Gorosei members had similar the struggles we've seen in the stories already. So conflict, particularly civil conflict. And as such, what we'll do now is we'll move on to speedrunning the other Gorosei members, so we can speculate a few details where they might be from and what their agendas were. Through Oda's characterization of Marcus Mars, the reader can infer he is connected to Skypiea, right? In the Egghead arc, Mars' major interactions take place on Punk Records, reminiscent of a Sky Island. Mars looks like York carrying the burn bazooka, right, which is from Skypiea. Mars looks like Ganfall, and the yokai form Mars takes is an Itsumadi, the design for which Oda matched to the art style of the murals that depict the Sky Race's descent. Consistent with almost every arc in One Piece, there was likely some sort of family conflict, leaving one side of the family to descend down to Ganfall, and the other side of the line going to Marijua to join under Imu, which is embodied by the Shandora versus Burka conflicts up in the Sky Islands. Such connections could lead us to speculate that Nami is involved with overcoming Mars, as she has deep connections to the Sky Islands. My personal prediction, if I had to guess a Gorosei that was going to be in Elbath, it would be Marcus Mars. Elbath has tons of connections to Birkins and Sky Islands, and just the imagery fits with its Amadi as well. So we might see Mars come at the very end of Elbath and get destroyed, basically. And there could be a little tie-up with Lilith, Mars, and York, because Mars was involved with, turning York against the rest of the Vegapunk. But moving on, Top Man has a very distinct pattern on his Hoki form, which matches what we see with Law's character design, as well as a couple others. Top Man Walkery has the word war in his name, and the Vinsmokes, who hail from the North Sea, are highlighted to be the major military faction in the One Piece world, strongly suggesting Top Man was engaged somewhat or lost a war to the Vinsmokes in the North. The top in his name could be a nod to North being the top of the map, and Boars and the Hoki Yokai have some interesting connections to snow in One Piece, evoking the White City, Flevens. So Top Man's motivations probably stem from a defeat in the Battle of the Vinsmokes, Top Man to become bitter, etc, etc. I know I just glazed over that very lightly, but if Top Man isn't from the North Blue, or isn't his region, then I will give you my channel. Because there is plenty more evidence, and all of these line up so well. Saturn featured heavily during the Egghead arc, for example. This arc features the South Blue prominently, as well as a character such as Bonnie, Ginny, and Kuma. Saturn connects to these characters on a personal level, seen through flashbacks throughout the arc, which involved Saturn at God Valley. Saturn's involvement with Ginny and resulted in Saturn's connection to Bonnie in the current storyline. Furthermore, the unique pattern that Saturn shows is flame markings, echoing what we learnt about the eternal flame and flame energy. Saturn ridiculed scientists. Beside Nozdro, Saturn is one of the more obvious Gorosei to place, as his connections just tie so heavily to the South Blue. So we've got Nozdro over at Wano in the New World, we've got Top Man in the North Blue, we've got Saturn in the South Blue. Now, the hardest one to place is probably Jupiter. I'm covering Jupiter in his own video pretty soon, but Jupiter could be connected to Alabasta, and may even be Lily Nefertari's younger brother. This Gorosei member was shown to not have as much knowledge as the other members, like in the whole scene when they were talking about the Nika fruit. The Nefertari are connected to serpents, and Jupiter's yokai is a sandworm. Suggests the sandworm may have been the one to create the tunnels that were then used for the hot springs years later. A large overlooked aspect of the Gorosei is their connection to disease. Each member appears linked to a specific region, and in these regions a significant illness or affliction arises. Top Man Walkery, seemingly tied to the North Blue, connects to Amber Lead Syndrome, a hereditary and terminal disease caused by exposure to precious yet toxic mineral amber lead. Marcus Mars, associated with Skypiea, corresponds with tree fever, a deadly affliction seen highlighted in that region. Nozdro is from Wano, where we see the pollution from manufacturing smile fruits causes the locals to suffer permanent smiles. Saturn, of course, ties to Sapphire Scale through his connections to the South Blue and Ginny, and if Jupiter is from Alabasta, then it's likely, in my opinion, the 5-day disease that fits this pattern. Oda seems to be suggesting that humanity's pursuit of godlike powers always comes at a cost, and that power in all its forms has consequences. The connection between gods and valuable resources is a central theme in One Piece, and it's only building. A prime example is God Valley, a location whose name alone implies a divine significance tied to an undisclosed yet highly valuable resource. We know this because that was the reason they were staked to choose God Valley. Whatever lies hidden at God Valley was so powerful that it drew the attention of the world's strongest figures. Similarly, in the North Blue, the island of Flevens was rich in amber lead, a sought-after mineral that proved to be a death sentence for its inhabitants, cursing them with a fatal disease passed down through generations. But how does this connect to gods? Trafalgar Law, a survivor of Flevens, wields the Opi Opi Nomi, a fruit that just so happens to have the legendary ability to grant immortality. The contrast here is significant. Amber lead, which shortens lifespan, is juxtaposed with the Opi Opi Nomi's ability to extend them. Even the name Amber Lead hints to this. Amber is often associated with preservation, such as the famous scene in Jurassic Park with the fossilized mosquitoes, while lead is the opposite of gold in traditional alchemy, implying toxicity and corruption. This dichotomy may reflect Emu, the shadowy ruler of the world who is often depicted in darkness. If Emu is tied to the mining of amber lead, then their own longevity may come at the direct cost of human lives, a cycle of power sustained through suffering. Not good. Now, the reason why I bring this up as relevant to the core meaning of the story is because gods have been used to reflect energy sources in One Piece. We can think of it kind of like sun god Nika, solar power, rain god is hydroelectric vibes, so think Alabaster and the drought. Then we have the earth god, which is fossil fuels, so relevant to the amber lead thing, you know, they're mining amber lead and a product of it is people are getting sick. And of course the forest god, which is probably like biomass energy, right, living energy, which we actually see in Wano pretty detailed when Greenball's walking around and we see the side effects of his devil fruit. Oda weaves this symbolism throughout the series, but the most direct example is Enel. As the self-proclaimed god of Skypiea, he wields the Goro Goro, generating electricity. His cover story revealed that his power served as an energy source for the ancient moon city of Burka, essentially powering up the entire city. And the city shares its name with his birthplace in Skypiea. This direct link between divinity and energy reinforces the idea that gods in One Piece play a massive role in the exploitation of resources and power throughout, and we will see this reflected in the 3 eras of history that's been foreshadowed in Elbaf. Now, a more abstract example would be Luffy, whose presence fuels revolution and liberation. His charisma and determination acts as a catalyst, igniting rebellion and inspiring those around him to essentially stop taking shit. In this sense, Luffy embodies the power of fire, a force that can either destroy or illuminate, depending on its use. He does not seek to exploit energy like the Gorosei, and instead he sparks change. So the most important contrast here is, while Imu is probably using the world's resources at a very costly rate to sustain her own agenda and immortality, Luffy doesn't intend any of that, and he just, as a byproduct of being the sun, fuels people to nurture their own dreams and grow and develop. And we are told that it's inevitable, and this is how the world changes. There is one key moment during the Void Century that is more important than any other, and it ties pretty much all of the elements we've spoken about today together. This is when Imu became immortal. Through Doflamingo's monologues, we as readers can discern that 2 surgeries took place during the Void Century, which is the body swap surgery and the immortality surgery. I go into detail explaining this in a previous video if you want more details about the specific words that were used that tell us exactly what happened. What makes this moment so important is that Imu cannot develop out of her old ways, because without death there is no rebirth, and so no changing of an era. Imu is quite literally stuck in her ways. This foreshadows Imu's death as a certainty if we believe that Luffy will succeed. The fact Imu is one of the most important characters of the entire series tells the reader death and rebirth are key to Oda's message, like absolutely tons of other myths. Mortality and immortality are key themes in the story and will likely come up again around Luffy's lifespan, repeatedly being depleted, and many believe Imu to have extended life. Characters like Kureha highlight mysterious secrets around youth, while Giola talks about immortality in heaven with her art fruit, connecting immortality back to godhood again. Conversely, Oda includes elements that reduce lifespan, such as the Amber Lead syndrome or the hormones that Ivankov used to treat Luffy. Now, what's interesting here is Dofi tells us that power has a short shelf life, and yet Imu preserves a giant straw hat in the Marie Joie cellar. In contrast, Roger was too early for Laugh Tale, meaning Joy Boy's legacy takes time and require people to shepherd the will of D along. In other words, this tells there's an element of decay involved with Imu's character, which we see associated with lifespan again in stuff like Amber Lead. In other words, Imu's power and or life is depleting over time, or perhaps each generation. So what we're saying here is that the straw hat being artificially preserved suggests that there's something in there that's decaying over time. Now, when we align that with what Dofi said about power having a short shelf life, and then you contrast that against the fact that the Will of D has taken over 800 years to complete, it would suggest that basically Emu's on a more like an impatient response, quick reward systems vibe, whereas Joy Boy has learned that these things that true change takes a long time, and it's about making sacrifices that contribute to guiding them changes over the centuries. Now, we could go down the rabbit hole and look at the interactions between the lore surrounding Lily Nefertari and Emu, which might suggest there could be reasons Emu kidnapped Vivi, and if Emu is successful, they might use Vivi to reset Emu's shelf life per se. So in other words, a mortal surgery or something like that is performed on a Nefertari woman, just like it was on Lily, or something along them lines, and then is instilled inside Emu to essentially revitalize Emu for another generation. Now, it's from here that we can understand that the message Oda is telling the reader is that, while the external things don't last forever, it's what's inside that counts, and what's inside that's immortal. So Emu's rule is external, it can't go on forever, but Emu's legacy that she's left will go on forever, unless it's forgotten. Joy Boy understood this, so passed down a message that resonates internally through will, bonds, and friendships. The voice of all things is something that affects a person internally also, whereas Emu, on the other hand, changes people physically, changes the world physically, and rather than changing herself to her surroundings, she changes her surroundings to herself, which throughout history has been referred to as masculine energy or Western energy. Because Vegapunk told us that Roger learned the truth from the purest source, which was something at Laugh-Tale. In other words, you have to have a connection to the voice of all things, most likely, to actually understand the true history for what it really is and understand what the One Piece is, which Emu probably doesn't have access to because she's so externalized, right? Oda intrinsically wove the idea of prolonged life with advanced technology through the fire thief motif, something we see repeatedly throughout the story. In fact, I would argue it's probably one of the most prominent themes throughout all of One Piece. The fire thief motif is the notion that as humans develop certain aspects of themselves, most commonly technology, they risk destroying themselves. In other words, while fire brings development such as cooking food, it also brings risks such as burning yourself. Nuclear energy is commonly attached to this idea in the modern world because while it provides clean and stable energy for the most part, it also facilitates the capacity for nuclear weapons. All of this was embodied by Oda and the Mother Flame in that whole situation. Oda, the Mother Flame, and aspects of greed within humanity during Egghead. In terms of the story, this refers to the Ancient Kingdom and the fact that they developed advanced technology beyond what they could control. Presumably, devil fruits are among these inventions. In line with the fire thief motif, it's likely desire from necessity turned to greed, and the Ancient Kingdom pushed their capabilities too far at the expense of its people, and ultimately the kingdom itself. The biggest victim to all of this, I believe, is Emu, and this creates the foundation for why Emu is such a tit. All of this history led to the Ancient Kingdom fracturing and spreading across the world, with its remnants falling under the rule of the world government. These remnants make up islands we see in the story, confirmed by Vegapunk, who stated, "We are currently living on pieces of a continent that existed long ago." Considering the D-Clan is comprised of people from different lands, it could be that they are the descendants of the Ancient Kingdom. This makes sense as no celestial dragons are members of the D-Clan, and so are likely instead the descendants of those who overthrew the D-Clan in the Ancient Kingdom. Oda foreshadows this through the three Saki brothers, two of which are Ace and Luffy are D members, and Sabo being the only one related to celestial families and not having the initial. This is also manifested in the modern narrative, with members of the D-Clan resisting or struggling with authority, such as Saul allowing the giants to save the books of O'Hara despite being a marine, right? That would have been against his orders. Evidence that the D-Clan and the Ancient Kingdom are tied can be seen through some of the only members of the D-Clan that died without smiling. Clover was killed for saying the name of the Ancient Kingdom, and Cobra was killed for saying the D initial, suggesting these two could potentially share the same name. This starts to add up when you realise the only part of Vegapunk's speech that was actually blurred out was when he was naming the D-Clan and talking about who they really were. Again, this reinforces the idea of contrasting perceptions from Joy Boy and Emu as they share the same name, hinted by Luffy when he says, "If you hurt somebody or if somebody hurts you, the same red blood will be shed," in chapter 218. So what happens? How did three relatives and Nakama, Lily, Joy Boy, and Emu come to such a great conflict? One possibility is that Joy Boy was a renowned prince of the Ancient Kingdom, cherished for all the wrong reasons, such as heritage and prophecy. Now, Emu was probably the younger brother, right? The second son, as it's commonly known, which is foreshadowed by the Juro suffix in Nuzjuro. So there's probably a bit of sibling rivalry between Emu and Joy Boy, and a bit of bitterness, a bit of jealousy, a bit of hate. I think it's likely while Joy Boy was lauded, what was actually going on behind the scenes was that Emu was being experimented on using advanced technology, and this was done in the name of some sort of search for God or tribute to God or something to do with a higher power. So Emu's the victim being experimented on so that the Ancient Kingdom discover new technology and grow their power even further. I think this peaked when Joy Boy was arranged to marry Lily, but on learning the truth about what was happening to Emu, Joy Boy fled, forfeiting the crown and essentially going on the first journey to discover the entire world. But he didn't know he was doing that at that point. He was just fleeing the kingdom, right? Leaving his brother behind, leaving the Ancient Kingdom to Emu as a second son to take over, even though Emu's become twisted at this point. Now, it's possible that Emu even took Joy Boy's place and married Lily, and used this opportunity to bind some of the kingdoms and marry Lily, basically forming political alliances and causing and gaining allies enough to begin to overthrow the Ancient Kingdom. Subsequently, Emu probably made many freedoms illegal, causing Joy Boy to be the first pirate told lost by Vegapunk, as well as leading to Lily's exile to Amazon Lily. Through this advanced technology that I was discussing before, after Lily left, I imagine there was some sort of development of lovesickness. It's like an insurance policy for Emu. Lily can't leave, but Lily just decides to leave anyway, causing Emu to be very sick from lovesickness and causing Lily to be so sick she eventually dies. From here, Joy Boy provides aid to those suffering under Emu's. But back to Joy Boy, while he's travelling the world, he's probably aiding those who are suffering under the new rule of Emu, whereby he meets his Nakama and creates his first pirate crew. Joy Boy takes the Ancient Kingdom symbol as his Jolly Roger, as I've been talking about for years, and sets about liberating the world. Duality is one of the core themes of One Piece, expressed through Luffy and Blackbeard, for example. Oda sometimes manifests this through the idea of human heroes and villains, or monsters. "You're the moon unaware of the dawn. May your purpose be fulfilled" is a message from the heavens for Emu to move aside, so the dawn of new era may begin, demonstrating a natural procession between yin and yang. The manga tells us about the difference between the two and how they relate to good, bad, and the human experience in the real world. Oda showed us that Emu was nurtured with cruelty, which led to them becoming a totalitarian and hateful global leader, foreshadowed by Captain Morgan in the quote, "My rank is the highest on this base, which makes me superior to everyone else here. That means everything I do is right." This quote explicitly portrays the absolute rule that Emu has over the world, emphasizing the fact Emu's at the top and justice is dictated by the top. This approach is contrasted by protagonists such as Otohime, through her dream and subsequent speech, whereby she illustrates the effects of hateful nurturing, stating, "If you hurt somebody or somebody hurts you, the same red blood will be shed. It hardly seems like a path because it's a very thin and narrow tube, but it makes its way through the prejudice that makes people fear each other and blood feuds so very easily." Fisher Tiger's last words lament the hateful state of the world. He says, "Soon all that will be left in this world is hate. Isn't it ridiculous? My head knows all this, but a demon has taken over my heart. My body would reject that blood. I've tried, but after all this, I just can't ever love a human." Doflamingo confirms the hateful era descends from the top in the quote, "The higher up you go, the more you see of the hatred-filled world." In chapter 782, Roger realized the truth about the world, sacrificed himself, and succeeded in changing it, confirmed by Dadan in the quote, "Your father died and changed the world. When you become the man he was, then you can decide whether you live or die," is a quote from Dadan that tells us Roger succeeded in his mission. Roger and his crew subtly guide Luffy's journey, for example in Elbaf with Scopper Gaban, who mentions mixing races, highlighting how flexibility is important. While this is a reference to Emu's totalitarian regime, it's also a nod towards Luffy's Nika powers, making him flexible. We see this embodied by Nika's distinctive body shape. Roger became king of the pirates, and the story tells us what that entails, by comparing and contrasting Roger against other kings, such as King Bakori, King Wapol, King Riku, King Cobra, King Harold, and King Neptune. Roger's greatest power, like Luffy, was his ability to make allies and draw people to his cause. This was confirmed when Mihawk says, "It's not a devil fruit or some cheap trick. One by one, he turns the people around him into his allies, more than anyone else sailing the seas. That man possesses the most terrifying power." Additionally, throughout One Piece, a recurring theme emerges. Power, whether divine or industrial, always has consequences. The Gorosei's ties to disease suggest that their control over the world is not just political, but deeply intertwined with suffering. Whether it's the environmental devastation of Wano, the generational curse of Amber Lead, or the toxic consequences of manufacturing smile fruits, the pursuit of godlike power inevitably results in destruction. If gods in One Piece symbolize energy sources, and the Gorosei represent those who exploit them, then Oda may be offering a critique of historical and modern power structures. Those in control have long-wielded resources at the expense of the people, poisoning lands and lives in their pursuit of dominance. At the heart of it all, Luffy stands as the antithesis to this system, and to Emu, not as a god, but as the flame that inspires freedom and change. Thanks for watching today, guys. Join the cause by subscribing, and if you made it this far, you just won some Wapol metal, so let me know where you want it posted in the comments. The next video is about cracking the cipher for the Holy Knights, so we can properly understand who all these people are and how they've featured previously in the story. How did you think the video went? Any improvements? Different music maybe? Or maybe you want to comment on the style of the video. I see some of you want to share your theory thoughts in the comments, but if they're too big, don't break your back over it. Instead, jump in the Discord, say, "Hey, get some dialogue going and we'll cook something up." Don't forget, if you want to be paid to feature your own theories on the channel, just ask. Additionally, we have some of the most gorgeous 3D prints you've ever seen, all hand-painted by two brothers who you can talk to whenever you want in the Discord, and we also do TCG card holders and frames which are pretty cheap and now litter my house. Links for all of these below in the description. Quick shoutouts to the TLA Discord, which is going absolutely crazy with these new chapters, so consider setting up camp in our cozy crew for the final stretch of the story. Be nice to people, nicer to animals, and toodlepip.